Hello and welcome viewers, I am Pia and you're watching NewX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines this hour. US President Donald Trump is heading to Israel amid a truce and major hostage exchange deal that he helped broker. He's expected to visit Jerusalem and may address the Knesset as part of the historic ceasefire. As the US government shutdown enters its 11th day, the White House has started laying off thousands of federal workers across several agencies. Trump has stated that job cuts will be Democrat-oriented. Meanwhile, union leaders are warning that Trump's move could have devastating effects on services relied upon by millions of Americans. National Guard troops are on the ground in Memphis while judges have stalled President Donald Trump's plan to deploy the National Guard in Chicago and Portland in Oregon. Republican governor of Memphis, Bill Lee, has now supported the use of the National Guard to further a federal crackdown on crime. US President Donald Trump has announced that he will impose a sweeping 100% tariff on all imports from China effective from the 1st of November over and above the tariffs that China is already imposed upon. Now, Trump's move comes in direct retaliation to what the White House calls Beijing's hostile restrictions on the export of rare earth minerals. French President Emmanuel Macron has reappointed Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu just days after his resignation. The unexpected reappointment is seen as a high-stakes bid to end a political deadlock in France. Lecornu is now tasked with the urgent mission of forming a new cabinet and delivering a critical national budget by the end of the year. Massive explosion has leveled the Tennessee military explosive plant. While at least 19 people are unaccounted for, many others are feared dead as well. Federal and local agencies are on the scene, but the cause of the devastating explosion remains under investigation. Nobel Prize winner Maria Corina Machado has dedicated her award to US President Donald Trump, stating that he deserved the honor for his decisive support of Venezuela's struggle for democracy. A Venezuelan opposition leader's statement comes just hours after the White House criticized the Nobel Committee for snubbing Trump. Well, viewers, those were the headlines in our top focus. US President Donald Trump has stated that hostages held by Hamas in Gaza are expected to return home on Monday. Speaking at the White House, Trump has stated that around 28 bodies still need to be recovered and that he plans to travel to Cairo before addressing Israel's Knesset and returning to Washington on Tuesday. Now, under this deal, Hamas has 72 hours to release the 20 remaining Israeli hostages that are alive once troops withdraw. Meanwhile, Israel will free more than 1,900 Palestinian prisoners and detainees. Hundreds of aid trucks are also set to enter Gaza daily, carrying food and medicine as the truce takes place. Trump also states that he believes that the ceasefire which began on Friday will hold as Israel and Hamas are tired of fighting. Listen in to what he said.
And as you know, on Monday the hostages come back. They're getting them now. I mean, they're getting them now. They're in some pretty rough places under earth. They're in some pretty rough places where only a few people know where they are in some cases. So they're getting them, and they're also getting the bodies, approximately 28 bodies. And some of those bodies are being unearthed right now as we speak. I mean, they're working on it right now as we speak. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy. No, he was very happy with it. And I can tell you that I saw Israel dancing in the streets, but they were dancing in Qatar and Saudi Arabia and UAE and many, many countries. I saw Egypt. They were dancing. I'll be going to Israel. I'll be speaking at the Knesset.
Meanwhile, Israeli troops are positioning in Gaza after a ceasefire agreement to end the war has come into effect. In fact, a video released by the Israeli military shows soldiers pulling back from urban areas in Gaza. This is, of course, the latest, and all eyes are on Trump's high-stakes visit that is set to take place tomorrow. Remember, he'll be visiting Jerusalem. He'll also be addressing the Israeli Knesset and then heading to Cairo as well. Remember, the talks were brokered in Egypt. Egypt was a crucial mediator along with Qatar, which has helped in realizing this deal. With us on the broadcast is Dr. Wael Awad. He's an expert on affairs in the Middle East. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us on NewX World. At the outset, I wanted to understand from you, we've been seeing scenes of jubilance from both, Gaza as well as Israel. People on the ground are really happy that the ceasefire has come into place and the bombardment of Gaza will now stop. Do you think this then paves the way for lasting peace?
Well, I hope so, because this is one of the international community dreams and the whole world of humanity, that they wanted to make sure that this genocide is being stopped and the killing of the Palestinians should be ceased, and the peace should be a second phase of the ceasefire is to achieve peace among the Israelis and the Palestinians. And having said that, I would say yes, at least the achievement of Trump peace plan has been that halting of all the operation and exchange of the prisoners, which will also give a hope that there could be a permanent peace. But I am doubtful it look like more of abusive peace rather than a durable peace.
Indeed, and this is the first phase that we're seeing being implemented. There are further phases to Trump's 20-point plan, something that Hamas has not agreed to in its entirety. There are still some clauses, some elements that are contentious, such as the disarmament of Hamas. But another thing that Hamas has not really spoken about and has remained mum so far is Trump's bid to establish an international board of peace. Do you then think that this silence could then emerge as a sticking point in negotiations down the line?
I don't think Hamas is the major player in this story. It is mostly the Arab country, the peace brokers like Egypt, like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, United States, Turkey, have played a major role in forcing Hamas into agreeing to the peace plan of President Trump. But that does not address the issue of the Palestinian cause. See, the problem of the world is having a political insomnia about the actual fighting about the Palestine and the problem with Israeli occupation and the division of Palestine since 1948. So therefore, if we are looking at the issues from the historical perspective, then we must address the issues of the Palestinian cause and two-state solution to solve the problem. Because as long as occupation is there, there will be resistance to occupation. So you cannot achieve peace by force, nor you can have a piecemeal for peace. It has to be a comprehensive peace plan based on the United Nations Security Council resolutions, and also addressing the issues of the peace and tranquility among the neighbors. But the problem lying in the Middle East, as we have been following it for many years, that there are also Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, knows that his survival in the political career in Israel depends on the continuity of the war, and that was the chief of the security Shabak. If Israel have already stated and have said it long time before. So I think what we are witnessing here, privatization of the foreign policy of a country cannot be a policy or a tool to achieve peace of a country which has been subjugated to all kinds of atrocities, killing, oppression, suppression. So therefore, you have to end settlement, you have to end expansion. And I don't see that Israel is willing to do so, not Hamas, because Hamas is a faction. And the moment you continue occupation, there'll be thousands of Hamas opening their eyes to fight for their liberty and freedom.
Indeed, and speaking of Palestine and the fact that you mentioned factions, how do you then think could the different factions, including the Palestinian Authority, then be reconciled under this framework that has been proposed by Trump?
Well, I think the Palestinians have to address their issue first. If the Palestinian Authority is seriously keen on unification among the Palestinians, they should go back to the Beijing conference that have met last year, which was between the Palestinian faction Hamas and the Palestinian authorities, which have never been implemented. Because, see, the point in Palestine, we all know that the creation of Hamas, the support that got from the Israeli government especially from Prime Minister Netanyahu, was only on one condition to the Palestinian Authority, that the rift between Hamas and Palestinian Authority should continue and there should be no reconciliation. Now they have achieved their objective of destructions of total Gaza Strip, trying to dismantle Hamas, trying to apart Hamas from the leadership. Then that the Palestinian Authority has to come forward and unify the Palestinian people so that they can have a problem, because the major issue here is not who is going to rule Gaza Strip. The question here is, does the Palestinian Authority have a tool of survival among the trends that we are witnessing in West Bank, where you can see the Israelis are expanding their settlement, they are annexing lands, and now the eye is on wholly or partially annexing the West Bank by the Israeli government. So I think there is a major challenges for the Palestinian people that they should unify if they wanted to take a unified stand to face the challenges that they're going to be ahead in the coming days.
All right, so with that, I would like to thank you for taking our time and speaking to us on NewX World. Shifting focus to more news coming in, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused Moscow of being unwilling to halt its offensive, stating that even Hamas has been ready to stop fighting, but Kremlin is not. Zelensky has spoken after a massive overnight Russian attack that killed a child and left 9 regions without power. He's also stated that Russia deliberately waited for bad weather before staging a vast attack on Ukraine's energy system, adding that the conditions reduce the efficiency of air defense between 20% and 30%. Listen in.
І те, що ми сьогодні бачили, що вони зробили, накопичували, розуміли, що вони будуть робити, чекались дощу, туману, розуміючи чітко, що і дощі заважають будь-кому працювати ширше, використовувати авіацію. Тобто вони знають, що вони роблять, ну і ми знаємо, що метеоумови десь зменшили відбиття наше десь відсотків, я вважаю, на 20-30. Я думаю, що це було, саме дало такий ефект. Да? Але тим не менш, якщо ми можемо упродовж дня відновити, майже відновити водопостачання, і я думаю, що будуть процеси щодо більш позитивного рішення по електриці, то це удар сильний, да, але він точно не смертельний. Дивіться, що відбувається. Навіть Хамас, розумієте, всі готові в якийсь момент так, до припинення бойових дій. Окрім, відповідно, Кремля, окрім, відповідно, Путіна. Ми це бачимо. І тому тут потрібно зупиняти силою.
Meanwhile, U.S. First Lady Melania Trump has stated that she secured an open line of communication with Russian President Vladimir Putin about repatriating children caught up in the war in Ukraine. And she's also stated that some have been returned to their families, with more set to be reunited very soon. The U.S. First Lady has stated that a representative was working directly with Putin's team to secure the safe reunification of children with their families between Russia and Ukraine. She's added that 8 children have been returned to their families within the last 24 hours. Listen in.
Much has unfolded since President Putin received my letter last August. He responded in writing, signaling a willingness to engage with me directly and outlining details regarding the Ukrainian children residing in Russia. And since then, President Putin and I have had an open channel of communication regarding the welfare of these children. In fact, 8 children have been rejoined with their families during the past 24 hours. Each child has lived in turmoil because of the war in Ukraine. 3 were separated from their parents and displaced to the Russian Federation because of frontline fighting. The other 5 were separated from family members across borders because of the conflict, including 1 young girl who has now been reunited from Ukraine to Russia.
With us on the broadcast is Mr. Daniel Botman, Syria correspondent for the National Telegraph, joining us from Toronto in Canada. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us on NewX World. We've been seeing an increased barrage of missiles being fired from Russia into Ukraine, and likewise with energy infrastructure being targeted specifically. What do you think could be the long-term implications of this, considering that winter is just around the corner?
Well, I mean, this is very bad for the Russian Federation. They've gone from, what John McCain infamously called a gas stop in Eurasia to a country that's now importing gas. And with winter coming, it looks like the demands for fuel might increase and put real stress on the Russians. So how are the Russians going to handle this? It's going to be a very interesting winter for Russia, because they're in a very bad spot. The Ukrainians have managed to figure out how to hit their infrastructure. They've lost the Russians have completely lost the Trump administration, which gave them every benefit of the doubt, played into every one of their clearly false propaganda talking points. But the Russians never accepted a deal, because the Russians are geared towards eternal war, and they're geared towards fighting Poland and the Baltics, because their population is in decline. They feel like they can't defend their borders, so they want a more secure border in their view. But their entire economy is now geared towards the war, and they're afraid that if they stop the war, there'll be a massive, massive layoff of all the laborers, and then they'll have a bunch of Russians coming home who've been trained towards violence. And in Russian history, when a bunch of Russian troops come back from a foreign conflict, they tend to throw a revolt and become a danger for the regime. So Russia's in no man's land right now, where they might listen. The Russian social contract is the Kremlin's allowed to basically do whatever it wants, foreign policy expansion wise. It can bomb this place, it can bomb that place, it can commit whatever. The people don't care, as long as it doesn't affect them. That's sort of the contract. You can do whatever you want in foreign policy, as long as it doesn't affect the Russian people. Well, it's starting to affect the Russian people. Taxes are going up, fuel shortages are being felt, they're going to start to have to ration. So this is a very, very tight spot for the Russians. And it's what might actually end up putting an end to the war, because if Russia's ability to wage war is depleted, there will be no war, because as we've seen over the last year, it is very clear that Russia does not want to end the war. They've been given every opportunity. Trump would even give them parts of Ukraine. But the Russians are geared towards total war in Eastern Europe. They've fully committed to it. They clearly don't have the resources, the infrastructure. They clearly went on bad intel. And now it looks like the only way the war will stop is with Russia's ability to wage war being crippled. So this is a very good sign for everyone outside of Russia who wants to see the war to end, where you're going to potentially see a collapse of the Russian ability to wage war, which will be the only thing that brings an end to it.
And speaking of the war itself, we've been seeing the Americans call on EU members, NATO particularly, to also share intel on Russia's critical energy infrastructure with Ukraine. However, NATO has been adopting a very cautious, a very calibrated approach. It's trying not to toe the line because it does not want to escalate anything on the Eastern Front. Simultaneously, we're also seeing France recently having stopped one of the shadow fleet oil tankers of Russia. Could we then see Europe trying to push back against Russia in the Baltic Sea?
I think the odds of the Europeans finally pushing back increase as the Russian ability to wage war decreases, and also the Russians have been provoking the Europeans. And one of the reasons that Trump cut the Europeans out of all talks in Ukraine is because the Europeans have been, exceptionally cowardly when it comes to dealing with Russia. Always worried about escalation and this and that, while the Russians are sending drones and all that into their airspace. I mean, there's a reason why Russia did this to Turkey. Russia tried to see how far they could get away with Turkey, and they sent fighter planes into Turkish airspace. They were immediately shot down. Russia has not messed with Turkey again. Conversely, Russia has been messing with Europe significantly and is increasing its antagonism of NATO countries in Europe because the Europeans have not pushed back on this. So I think as Russia weakens, I think the Europeans might find a bit of their courage and step up and do something. But again, listen, if the Europeans step in and sort of commit to some sort of force to at least protect Western Ukraine or whatever, you'll see probably the end of a war come soon as the Europeans show their willingness to fight back against the Russians. But the European cowardliness and hedging and immobility has sort of spurred on the Russians to continue the war further and further. So one would hope that the Europeans find a spine and use that to end the war. But again, all European bureaucrats have a completely inverted philosophy, don't understand the Russian mentality, don't understand peace through strength or any of that. So will the Europeans sort of find a bit of a backbone soon? Maybe. But if I'm the Ukrainians, I'm not holding my breath for that outcome.
All right, so requesting you to stay on with us as we're tracking further updates, this time from within the United States of America. U.S. President Donald Trump has blamed Democrats for his decision to lay off thousands of workers across the U.S. government as he followed through on his threat to cut the federal workforce during the government shutdown. Trump has stated that a lot of people would be included in his layoffs and that his administration has started because of this government shutdown, and cuts would be designed with Democrats in mind. Listen in.
Because we figure, they started this thing, so they should be Democrat-oriented. It'll be a lot, and we'll announce the numbers over the next couple of days, but it'll be a lot of people, all because of the Democrats. I mean, they want to give $1.5 trillion to people that came into the country illegally. More important than that, because we all have a big heart. We want people.
Job cuts were underway at the Treasury Department, the U.S. Health Agency, the Internal Revenue Service, and the Departments of Education, Commerce and Homeland Security's Cybersecurity Division. But the total extent of the layoffs was not immediately clear. Roughly 300,000 federal civilian workers had already been set to leave their jobs this year due to downsizing campaign initiated earlier this year by Donald Trump. Still with us on the broadcast is Mr. Daniel Bodman. We've seen this blame game going on in the United States of America, but it's the federal workers who've been furloughed. It's the federal workers who are now going to be laid off as well. In your assessment, which party is this continued government shutdown and the consequences of this going to hurt more?
I mean, it all depends on how you spin it. And America is very different than other countries when it comes to sort of a federal or private versus public workforce. Americans are much more in favor of private workforce. I mean, for example, in Canada, listen, I'd love to see half of the government workers fired. They definitely hinder the economy in the country more than they help, at least half of them. But that is not that's not the mentality of America. So you can say maybe the Republicans stand to benefit more because their base can be sold on federal cuts and all that. But again, it has to come out like will these ultimately the Republicans are in charge, so the Republicans bear responsibility for what happens. And if these sort of cuts and the bureaucracy gets trimmed and it doesn't cause any catastrophic damage to the American economy, then the Republicans have a way to spin this and be like, listen, we cut the public workforce. Public workers are useless anyway. There's no private market incentive for them to do X, Y, and Z. Who needs the IRS? Rah, rah, rah. And that argument will work with a lot of, average Americans if there's no catastrophic events. Now, if the public workforce is cut, the government shut down for a long time, and it causes severe damage to the American society, well, then it's probably going to harm the Republicans more because the Republicans are in power. And you can blame the Democrats all you want, and if the Democrats are in power, everything bad will always be blamed on the Republicans and vice versa. This is not unique to America. This would work in Canada, India, Europe, anywhere where there's a democracy. Everything good is your party's fault. Everything bad is the opposing party's fault. That's not unique to any one country, but it really depends. If the consequences are severe and felt by the American people, it will hurt the Republicans. If the consequences aren't severe and the Republicans can kind of spin it as a good thing as they, trim the fat of the public service, save the taxpayer money, right? And you're a blue-collar average American who works a private sector job, you're not going to cry for someone in the IRS who, the guy who's filing, you have to file your taxes too. You're not going to cry if there's less IRS agents or something like that. So it all depends on how bad the shutdown affects the economy and how well Republicans can spin it if it doesn't cause severe damage.
All right, sir. With that, I'd like to thank you for taking our time sharing your perspective with us on NewsX World. Viewers, shifting focus to more updates coming in. US President Donald Trump has stated that he will impose a 100% tariffs on imports from China starting next month. This has further escalated tensions between Washington and Beijing. Now, in a lengthy social media post on his platform Truth Social, Trump has also announced new export controls on critical software, accusing China of being very hostile after it tightened export rules on rare earth minerals. He even threatened to cancel a planned meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping before later saying that he was not sure that they were going to conduct it. Listen to what he has to say.
So, but I don't know that we're going to have it, but I'm going to be there regardless, so I would assume we might have it. But, they hit the world with something that really is not anything that people are going to do. And it was shocking. I can tell you, Howard and I and Todd, we all, Scott, we were all speaking about it before. And we said, where did that come from? It was just, that was out of the blue, right? Out of the blue, they came up with this whole import-export concept, and nobody knew anything about it.
With us on the broadcast is Professor Arvind Mahajan. He is the Lamar Savings Professor of Finance at Texas A&M University. Thank you so much, sir, for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX World. At the outset, the world's largest economy is once again in an all-out trade war with the world's second largest economy. In your assessment, how will this now impact global markets if it continues?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, we really don't know how far this will go. Clearly, trade wars are bad for everyone as a generality. In this particular one, this really comes as a surprise, especially in light of the fact that President Trump and President Xi were scheduled to meet each other at the end of this month at the Asia-Pacific Economic Forum in Seoul, Korea. So this really was very much unexpected. And I think the market is trying to digest this information and what exactly it means. It can have multiple implications. We just need more information. It could be at one level a part of a negotiating ramping up of pressure by China on the US. I mean, it's possible before the APEC meeting to gain some leverage. It is really unclear where this came from, but suddenly we are observing a more aggressive behavior from China, especially when we see that it is starting antitrust proceedings against Qualcomm. It's imposing some port fees, which were not expected. So it really is unclear at this juncture what the motivation of the Chinese is behind this, because nobody really expected this. So we just have to wait for a few days for more information to come to see what the underlying reasons for this were. Now, the US response is not surprising because one, I think it's simply a retaliation of what China is attempting to do with the critical mineral exports and the rare earth exports. Again, these are not new things. They have been in conversation for a while, except suddenly this came out of the blue when things seemed to be calming down, and people were optimistic that if President Trump and President Xi meet at the end of this month, that might alleviate some of the tensions. And this has just recreated those tensions. We just know very little at this juncture to be able to tell how it's going to get played out. But usually tariff wars don't have a history of happy endings.
Absolutely. And speaking of unhappy endings, who is this move likely to hurt more, the US or China, and in what ways?
Well, I mean, again, this is very unclear. From the US perspective, I think as a generality, from a US perspective, US thinks that it has more of what China needs than what China has of what US needs. As a general principle. And therefore, if there is an outright war, at least from the US perspective, the Chinese will be the net losers, which is not to say in a trading war, everyone loses. I mean, for example, the farmers in the US, the soybean farmers, they've been dramatically affected by these tariffs. China is importing very little of soybeans from the US. They're importing virtually everything from Brazil. So you're going to have individual segments of the industries which are going to be impacted in different ways. It's hard to tell in aggregation how this is going to get played out. At least from the US perspective, it seems that US has the upper hand. And therefore, China, and that is why it's unclear what triggered China to suddenly come up with these curbing of exports of critical minerals and rare earths.
Indeed, sir.
But everyone get hurt.
So requesting you to stay on with us. We're tracking some further updates in this development. China has hit back at the United States, announcing new port fees on US-owned, operated, built or flagged vessels. This is a direct countermeasure to Washington's new levies on China-linked ships taking effect the same day. Now, Beijing's Transport Ministry has stated that the move will come into force on Tuesday, expanding the charges to firms with US investment stakes of 25% or more, potentially affecting hundreds of vessels. Still with us on the broadcast is Professor Arvind Mahajan. That's not all. We've also seen that the Wall Street has crashed after Trump's announcement. $1.5 trillion in valuation has been wiped out. Dow Jones has fallen by 1.9%. S&P 500 is down 2.7%, and Nasdaq has tumbled 3.5%. Should this then be an indication to the Trump administration perhaps to not adopt such hardline protectionist stance?
Well, frankly, not really. The US stock market's been very resilient. If you will recall in March, when first time President Trump announced tariffs, the stock market reacted very badly. The S&P was down dramatically. But then as the stories unfolded, the market kept coming back. As a matter of fact, last week, it hit all-time high. So the S&P, the PE ratios have been the highest in a very, very long period of time. And so this one short, one day decline of 2%, while yes, it is very significant, but given the nature of the US market and how resilient it has been, and especially with the investments which are taking place in high-tech companies, especially in artificial intelligence, I, as an investor, really am not very worried because I've seen the market go down, I've seen the market recover, and I'm fairly optimistic that the economic indicators, by and large, in the US market are fairly healthy. There's an anticipation of the Fed reducing another round of reduction in federal funds rate. So I don't think the stock market can be taken, a one-day move in the stock market can be taken as a meaningful barometer of what the long-term consequences of these tariffs are going to be.
All right, sir. With that, I would like to thank you for taking our time sharing your analysis with us on NewX World. Viewers, with that, we're shifting our focus to more developments coming in from the United States, particularly Tennessee. At least 19 people have gone missing and are possibly dead after a devastating explosion at a military explosives plant in Tennessee. Now, the Humphreys County Sheriff has stated that the explosion at Accurate Energetic Systems has killed multiple people, but it is still too early to know precisely how many people have lost their lives. He has stated that it is possible that there are some survivors. The sheriff has called the incident the most devastating of his career and that investigators from the FBI and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives were at the scene working to determine the cause of the explosion. Listen in.
This is a huge ordeal. It's a very devastating ordeal. And I'm not talking about devastating on the scene. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about devastating in the fact of a loved one that just come to work and now may be missing or deceased. So please keep that thing.
All right, viewers, due to paucity of time, that's all we have for this bulletin. More news and updates on the other side. Stay tuned on NewX World.